This is Gemara Bava Metziah Daf Tes Zayin, and we're holding on the bottom of Tes Vav Amid Beis, and we begin today really by wrapping up a little bit of what we spoke about yesterday, and then we're going to really continue on a very similar theme, which is buying stolen properties, improving such properties, and what you could collect and how you could collect. But before we get to there, we begin about 15 lines to the bottom. The first order line is Pikadon. Amar Rava, Rava begins by paskening on that which we learned yesterday. Hilchasa, Yesh Eloi Ma'is, V'yesh Eloi Shevach. Says Rava that when one buys a land which afterwards is, we'll call it collected, or afterwards is seized by the rightful owner because what he bought was really stolen goods, the halacha is yesh ma'is. He gets back the money he paid, and says Rava, yesh shvach. He also gets back the improvements that he put into the field. And even though shlei pirish lo shevach, as we saw, that was a machlekes that if only you get back the shvach, if you explicitly said that you would. Says Rava, no, even without saying such explicitly, you still will get compensated back for that which you put into the field. Heker ba she'inoi shaloi v'lacha. Let's say you realized you went to buy this field from Ruvain, and you saw right through Ruvain's plan, and you saw that the field wasn't really Ruvain's, but still, you bought it anyways. What's the halacha? Again, we saw yesterday the different reasons why one would do that. Whether it was you felt you would give it as a pikada and a halva, different understandings we saw yesterday. But Paskins, the Gemara, Ma'is Yeshlo, you get back your money, Shvach Ein Loi. And finally, Achrayis. What is the status of Achrayis and Ashtar? Paskins, Rava, Ta'is, Seifer, Hu, Bein Bishtari Halva, Bein Bishtari Mekachu Memkar. That whether it's a purchase document, whether it's a loan document, if there is no achrayis written in, we assume that to be a mistake by the sefer, and every single document automatically has achrayis in the document. Automatically, it is considered like there is, I should say, achrayis in the document, even if it is not written. That really is the list of psak halacha from the previous two daf. And now we continue. Ba'i minei Shmuel mei Rav. Shmuel asks Rav the following fundamental shayla. Chazar v'locha mibailim harishayne mahu. In the case that we have been discussing, that one buys a field and it turns out that the field was stolen. So let's make Ruvain into the Gazlan. Shimon buys a field from Ruvain. Ruvain's the Gazlan. So now we've been discussing when the original owner, call him owner, comes to Levi to get back his field, and comes to Shimon, to get back his field. Let's keep this simple. Let's just call it Lekeach, the purchaser, and let's call it Gazlan, the stealer, and let's call it the Bailim, the original owner. It makes it much easier. So again, someone purchases a land from a Gazlan, from someone who stole the property. So we've been discussing what happens when the original owner comes to the purchaser to get back the land. So what happens if the Gazlan goes, the one who stole the field, goes back to the original owner that he stole the field from, and now buys the land from him. So he buys the land. For 1 second, where's the land right now? In the hands of he that he sold it to, the third party that the Gazlan sold it to. So how do we deal with this story? So Amar Lei, so Rav responds, Ma machar loy rishon l'sheni kol schos shetav aliyadai. Rav responds to Shmuel, Ma machar loy rishon l'sheni kol schos shetav aliyadai. That when he sold it, he sold all the schosim. So when the Gazlan sold to this purchaser, what did he effectively sell him? All his rights. So now when he goes and buys back that field, it's already sold to the third party, and the third party will keep it. Again, ma'machar lo rishon l'sheni. What did the first sell say? Kol schus shetava liyadai, and this is the schus that's coming, that he bought it back. So now the guy gets to keep the field. My time. What is the reason? Why do we assume that when he sold it to him, he sold it with all strings attached, or I say with no strings attached, that even subsequently, if he buys it, he'll keep it? What's the reason? Says the Gemara, two reasons. Marzucha Amar, says Marzucha, you know why? He doesn't want to be known as a Gazlan. And therefore, when he sells it fully. He is a Gazlan. So he sold it, let's say, with the mindset almost that if I eventually get this back, you're going to keep it because I don't want everyone to know that I was a Gazlan. That's Mar Zutra. Rav Ashi Amar, Nichalei Deleku Ben Nusa. He wants to be known as a trustworthy guy. And if he sells something and then a week later that item is collected, it looks pretty bad for him. Not so good for reputation that you sell a field on Sunday and the next week someone goes over to the purchaser and says, hey, you bought stolen goods. So he wants to be Behem Nusa. He wants to be that people should believe him. And therefore, he sells it with everything involved. Ma beinayu. What is the practical difference in these two answers? Beinayu demis loikeach, that the purchaser dies. Man according to the man da'amar, that the reason that you sell everything is because you want to not be known as a robber. Hamislay, then there's no problem because Lokech has died, and therefore no one's going to call the seller a Gazlan from the simple fact that the one that bought it from him is no longer alive. So therefore there's no issue in this case. Even for the children, it's the same thing. You want to seem like a trustworthy person, even merely to the kids. So if the Gemara asks on the first Taris, Tavis Kasha, who cares that the Loikeach died? So his children are going to call you a Gazlan. Either way, so it's calling you a Gazlan. The Gazlan died. So there's no one to be worried about. Here as well, these kids want their father to be known as a trustworthy guy. Says the Gemara, the same kasha. They call him a b'nei Gazlan. It's what do we gain? 10 lines down to Zayin Amadal. First line is Beinayu. The nafkamina is going to be where the Gazlan, someone steals a field and then he gives that field to someone else as a gift. Subsequently, he goes and he buys that field back from he that he stole it to. Do we say Mamacha Rishon L'Sheni applies to Matana as well? The person that he gave the gift to still will keep it after the robber purchases back the field. You want people to know you as a trustworthy person. The same thing. What have I stolen from you? What's the problem? It was a matana, so who cares that you lose it? So two different understanding as to whether and when we would say ma mochar rishon l'sheni. Says the Gemara, pshita. About 15 lines down, the two dots, the first line is pshita, the following is pashat. Zavna orta v'yava b'matana. That if Zavna, if the Gazlan sold the land, Orta, or he gave it to one of his children as a Yerusha, V'yava b'matana, or he gave it as a matana. In all of these three cases, Lav lo'okma kame loikeach kabai. he does not necessarily say the Braisa wanted to be in the hands of the Lekeach. Nafla lei Biyarusha. Similarly, if the Gazlan inherited the land after he sold it, same thing, he can take it back. Rerusha memelahi. So these are cases that circumvent the two reasons that we just said a moment ago, why we would say Mamach Arisha Nisheni. V'laviu Katarach Abasrei. He didn't do anything, he just fell into his lap. Gava Iu Bechayvai. If he collected this land that he stole as a chayv, chazino we see. I particularly want this field so that the lekeach could keep it. Kabai. So the lekeach can keep it. Then we allow him to. Vilai. Zuzehu debai lafruye. Debai lafruye. We assume that I'll pay him back. Again, we're discussing cases that this Gazlon got the field back. Again, let's a little bit complicated. Part A was the Gazlan, after selling this field to someone else, he went to the original owner and he bought it from him. So says the Gemara, we say this Gazlan, when he sold the field, sold it with everything, and now that he himself subsequently buys it back, of course, the purchaser keeps it. Now says the why? For two reasons. We said he doesn't want to be a Gazlan, he wants to be known as a trustworthy person. Now says the Gemara, numerous cases that how the Gazlan gets the field in another scenario, and whether the purchaser still keeps it. The last case we're talking about is Gavai B'chayvai. This Gazlan stole a field from, we'll call him Ruvain. And guess what? Ruvain owed the Gazlan $1,000. So when the Ruvain goes when the Gazlan goes to the Ruvain to get $1,000, he says to Ruvain, you know what? You owe me cash. Guess what? I stole your field. So let me just keep that field and we'll call it a day. So says the Gemara, if he particularly negotiated that field, why did he obviously do it? For the sake of the purchaser. If that was the only field that he had, one more time. If he had other fields that he specifically took that one, then he did it on the sake of the purchaser. If not, if that was the only field that he had, then it doesn't mean anything that he took that as payment. And therefore, it could be that the purchaser does not keep it. If it was given to him as a matana, pligi ba Ravacha v'Ravina. Chadam matana kerusha, the hamemila came without any bother. V'chadam matana kemechar. Why? Dilav the tarach v'artzi kameh. Because obviously, why does someone give you a present? Because he likes you. So if not for the fact that you're matriach and he liked you, lo yavin le matana lachi tarach v'artzi kameh, and that's the reason why you made friendly with him. Ki ichi deleikum. Say so that you could be be'amuna and keep this field in the purchaser's possession. So says the Gemara, numerous cases as to when the field would stay in the hands of the purchaser. Again, the guy who bought it from the Gazlan. Asks the Gemara now, after all those cases, how far does this svara go? This idea that one wants to be known as a trustworthy person and therefore he's overextending himself so that the field stays in the hands of the purchaser. So three cases, and basically what these three shitas are discussing is at what point you're not be'emunah anymore. The whole reason is you want to look like a trustworthy guy. But if there's already a hamad b'din, if the Gazlan is already standing trial, everyone knows that he's standing trial for a stolen field. So at that point, all hope is lost, says Rav Huna. Chia Barav says no. Even when you're standing trial, but if you can still make good until the seizure document comes. Once there's a seizure document, it's too late. Rav Papa says no. Even after the seizure document, until they actually come to collect the field. So maskiv la Rabbi Bar Chama. Mechti, let's see. Hay lokeach b'may kani. The lokeach, again, Ruvain, or whoever you want to call him, Gazlan, stole the field. Gazlan then sells the field to a purchaser. That purchaser is buying stolen goods. How did the purchaser make a kinyan l'hayara on this land? B'hayishtara. With how? With the star. I sold you something. I gave you a star. But again, what did I sell you? Stolen goods. So what was that star? Nothing. Hi, star chasabalmu. The star is absolutely nothing, says the Gemara. Amrle Rava tehei b'maminoi. No, you know how he acquired it with the emuna. With that benefit, because samach alein, you relied on him. Taruch u'maisilei gamar umaknilei. Similar to svaras that we had all over Kedushin, that you could marry someone with toivas hana. Could marry someone, the fact that they're happy with you, the fact that you did a taiva for them. So too over here, we're saying that the kinyan happens via the benefit that he has, that he knows that he's not questioning the field, questioning the sale, excuse me. Masav Rav Sheish is asked, Rav Sheish has 15 lines on the bottom, Umaknile, first 2 words on the line. Someone says, that which I will inherit from my father, I'm selling to you. Masha tell him, it's Yudasi, that which will come into my chat, I'm selling to you. It's nothing. But Masha Irish min Abba Hayoim, that which one says he'll inherit from his father on that day. Obviously, the father was deathly ill. Masha tell him, it's just say Hayoim, then Devarav Kayamim. Amar Rabbi Bar Chama, Hagavra V'ha Tiyufta. Says Rav Chama, here we have a great man, Rav Sheshes, and we have a wonderful kasha. Because what do we see over here? We see that you cannot give over something in the future. So says the Gemara, how in our case can you affect a kinyan on these stolen pieces of land? Amar Rava Gavra Kachazina. You're right, Rav Sheshes is indeed a great guy. But Tiyofta, what's the kasha? Look at Chazina. I don't see a kasha. When I want to sell something, Masha Irish, that which I eventually inherit, there's no semichas das, there's no reliance, so therefore it's nothing. Whereas in the other case, in our case, there is a semichos das. Says the Gemara, why? Because he thinks, when I'm buying something for my good friend Reuven, even though I know that Reuven stole that land, but I think that Reuven's going to figure out a way to go and get that land, so I'm not going to lose it. Because I know he doesn't want to be called a Gazlan. In the case of the Yerusha, there's no smichos das. Says the Gemara, Shalchua likamei de Rav Abba bar Zavda Amar Lahu Zuein Tzricha Lefnim. This is an akasha. Amar Rav Zu Tzricha Lefnim Lefnim. No, it's a Gavaldika Lefnim Lefnai Lefnim. Hacha Samzadaite Hacha Loisel Chadaite, like we just saw. Of the Pambedisa of Osve Oisve. There was a story in Pambedisa. They asked Rav Yosef in a Braisa. Amar Lahu Rav Yosef Zuein Tzricha Lefnim. Amar Abba Zu Tzricha Lefnim. Aiv Lefnim. Hacha Samzadaite. Again, the simple and critical difference between the two cases. So now, after all the flowery stories, says the Gemara, okay, Tachlis, Maishta Reisha, Maishta Seifa. What's the difference in both cases? What's the difference if he says that which I inherit from my father, or that which I inherit from my father? Hayoim. Either way, there's no real semichas das. He doesn't really rely on it. Amar Rav Yechon and Seifa Ma'ishivers Abayayim Misham Kavoid Aviv. The reason is it's a good sale because the honor of the father, Mashatalim Ayayim, as well as a good sale. Why? Misham Kidei Chayav, so he could live. Meaning, and we look at the top Rashi, and Rashi speaks out the case of Kidei Chayav, which will shed light as well on the prior case. Says Rashi, what's Kidei Chayav? Why? It's a special takana d'Rabbanan that it's a good sale. Shem tzarchim is a davar muat. Maybe he needs money very badly. If a mashal is called chaydesh, then you don't rely upon it. Similarly, else the covenant ameis, the covenant of the father, he knows his father's being nifter. That's the reason why he could sell it. He could give over the Yerusha on that day, the day that he seems to see his father slowly deteriorating. Says the Gemara, Amar Ravuna Amar Rav. The top line to Zayin and Beis, continuing the discussion of selling items which you don't really own yet. Amar Ravuna Amar Rav. Haimer lechaver sada she'ani lo ikeach. The field that I'm going to buy, lishe ekochena, when I buy it, kenu yalach me'achshav, I'm letting you acquire it as of today, before I even buy it. Kana, it's a good kinyan. Amar Rava says, Rava, I understand this din of Rav, that you could say that which I will purchase, you will acquire from me today in the stam field. Aval b'sada zu. If you say this particular field, it doesn't work. Why not? Because who says that you can be able to buy this particular field? And I make a shvuah, Rav. Afilu b'sada zu, Rav indeed even holds his din by a particular field. Says the Gemara, Mechti. Why? Rab Kivan Damar Laishmaita Rameir, the famous Rameir. Who's Rameir? We've had Rameir so many times. Damar Davar Makna Davar Shalai Bala Olam. Able to give away something even before it's in the world. The Tanya learned in a Bryce. Someone says to his wife, he's married. Excuse me. Incorrect. He's not Jewish yet. He says, marry me after I become a ger. After you become a ger. After I become free. After you become free. After your husband dies, after the Yavama performs chalitz in you, after your sister died that he's married to, Einai Mekudesh. Meir Mekudesh, why? Even though a woman is comparable to Sadazu, it's this particular case. Still, Rameir is a chiddush that holds Adam Makne Davar Shalai Ba Li Olam. Amar Shmuel, 15 lines down, the two dots, returning back to our original discussion. Someone finds a document of akna in the shuk. Now, what's a shtar akna? Let's remind yourself, a shtar akna is that they made a kinyan before the halva even happens, before Reuven even got the loan of $1 million from Shimon. He writes a document obligating himself to pay back that $1 million to Shimon. They make a kinyan even before the actual loan happens. So if you find such a document, what's the halacha? Yachzeru lebailim, you return it to the bailim, the bal chayv, the lender. Why? Because what are you worried about? You can return this document that maybe the halva never happened. The whole creation of a shtar akna is that you're obligating yourself even prior to the actual loan. Vimi Ryan, if you're going to tell me that no, maybe you paid it back already, why? Because of course, when you pay something back, you rip up the document. Amar Rav Nachman, proving this din of Shmuel. Abba min Safri Dayana Demar Shmuel. My father was one of the Seifrim of Shmuel. Have Vavina Kvar Shita Kvar Sheva. And I was 6 or 7 years old. It says Rav Nachman, I remember that they would announce V'amri, and they would say, if you find such a document in the marketplace, return it to the owner. So Rav Nachman saying over that he remembers as a child such a din being said over. Amar Rav Amram, says Rav Amram, I agree as well with Shmuel. Call Maisa Bezdin Areze Yachsir. Any Maisa Bezdin you return. Alma, what do we see? Look, they were not afraid that it was paid back. Just like in the case of Shmuel, and therefore you would return the document. Amar Le Rav Zera asks Rav Zera both on Rav Amnuna and on Shmuel. Mas Nisan, what's your raya? You just wanted to bring a raya. They call Maisa Bezdin you return. Bishtare Chaltasa are documents of foreclosure, vadrachta, and seizure warrants. What do you mean by Maisa Bezdin? It meant a document that you can collect something, but not something that could be paid. So what's your raya? My Rava says, Rava, Vani Lavane Pirayin. You know, what are you talking about? These documents are B'nei Pirayin. Vami Nardas and Nardas Shuma Hadarat Tracy Archishata. An evaluation or seized properties can be returned after up to 12 months. Vamar Ameimar. Anam Nardaya knows fairly, and I owe the Shuma Hadar La'ilam. You can always get it back. So clearly, it is something that could be paid up, and yet we see it's considered a Ma'isa Bezdin that is returned. So it is indeed a raya to Shmuel that we're not worried, we're not chayshish for pirayin, because when something is paid back, it's ripped up. Elamarava, no. Hasamaynu taima damri iu hu dafsan and avshay debinu depare. You messed yourself up. You should have ripped up the document. Inami lemichtav shara achrina liyei arena. Another document. This one is paid. Demedina arloy bailim ahedar. Umisham v'sid yashavat tovini Hashem udamar rabbanan teater. That's where the land is going back. Hilkach may ratio to kazavin. Ibayil lemichtav shtar zvini kabish shtar ibayilei lemichtav shtar achrina aluyei. Excuse me. Ibayilei lemichtav shtar zvini. Whereas, in contrast, Kabi Shtar Choiv, Michael and Meimar, in the case of the Shtar Akna, maybe I was delaying Inami of Shita de Safra Zaire Lay. Or the reason is that they didn't pay the cipher yet. So the Gemara is explaining is it's not a raya for the Shtar Drach to the Shtar Chaltasa, because over there are sensible, because by us there are sensible reasons maybe where the Shtar was not ripped up, even though it was paid. So it says Rava, we do not necessarily have a raya. Again, he's not contradicting the din. Lamaisa Shmuel Paskin that you do return the Shtar Akna. From the raya, Rava's questioning it that we shouldn't have a raya that it could be returned. We'll pick it up from Rav Avu on the next year. B'siyata Dishmaya.